It almost seemed like we're waiting basically forever for the Las Vegas Raiders season to come around. And it almost feels like when the season comes around, it just flies by. We're literally at the point where in 2 days from now, it's the Raiders' final game of the season. And unfortunately for the Raiders, we're not going to make the playoffs, so we won't see them come, the rest of January into February. But we do have one final game, and we're going to talk about this game because there's some interesting outlooks coming out from this game specifically. Plus, there's a couple of updates that have come out. One including the Las Vegas Raiders' former offensive coordinator Luke Getsy, and there's a wild card at the quarterback position that I kind of want to talk about. I watched a kid's tape early this morning. Kind of want to just give you guys my thoughts and opinions on him as well as Aidan O'Connell. We'll talk about that at the end of the video. Let's just get right into this Chargers game first and foremost. The injury report has come out. For the most part, the Raiders are healthy. We will end up losing Amir Abdullah, who for the first time broke 100 yards this past game. A poor guy, had a great game. 100 yards, was utilized. I don't know how many carries. He had like 15 carries. And then he ended up getting hurt. He ended up hurting his foot, and he will not play for the rest of the season. Of course, one game left. Outside of that, the Raiders are obviously fairly healthy. Nate Hobbs got an illness yesterday, so he actually might not play, right? So we'll see if he can overcome that by the time Sunday comes around. Outside of that, the Raiders are fairly healthy, given all the guys that are not healthy, like Koonce and Wilkins and Crosby and all those other guys that are kind of out for the rest of the season. The Chargers are also fairly healthy. They will be without their starting running back, Gus Edwards. And then the rest of the guys for the Chargers will basically be playing. Now let's talk about why this game actually matters. Of course, the Raiders have the 8th overall pick. After the last 2 wins, we've dropped down to 8, right? 8 picks, essentially, because we had the first overall pick a couple weeks back. But what's interesting now is for the Raiders, if you win this last game, it really doesn't impact you all that much. At worst, you're going to go from pick 8 down to pick 10. That's the worst case scenario if you win this game. And truth be told, there's going to be other teams that'll end up winning this week as well. There's multiple teams tied at 4 wins. I'm sure some of these teams will end up winning. The Giants, who have 3 wins, are playing an Eagles team. The Eagles are basically going to keep their starters out. So they'll probably end up winning as well. So, we'll see where the Raiders kind of end up in terms of the draft pick. But the Raiders got to focus on beating the Chargers because, not only is it for Aidan O'Connell to go out there and kind of prove himself, but this team has to, kind of learn to win. The offensive coordinator had, I would say, the best game of the season this past week. From a consistency standpoint, I feel like it's looking a lot better. More than that, for the Chargers, if the Chargers actually lose to the Raiders, it impacts their seeding a lot. Now, the Chargers will rely on the Pittsburgh Steelers to have to lose as well, right? So the Steelers have a match coming up against the Bengals. If the Bengals win, they're in the playoffs. If the Steelers win, they lock in the number 5 overall seed, right? For the Chargers, what that means is if the Steelers lose, the Chargers will basically get to pick. They can either win, they can either lose. If they win, they get the 5th seed. If they lose, they get the 6th seed. Now, here's the difference. If you have the 5th seed, you'll essentially be playing the 4th seed. If you have the 6th seed, you'll essentially be playing the 3rd seed. So if the Raiders beat the Chargers come Sunday, the Chargers will actually end up having to go to Baltimore to play the Baltimore Ravens. If the Chargers beat the Raiders, the Chargers will get an easier matchup, and they'll get to play the Houston Texans. Obviously, that'll be in Houston as well. But, if you guys think about it, there's a massive difference between the Texans and the Ravens. I think the Ravens have a real shot to win the Super Bowl this year based off the way Lamar's been kind of playing this season. As opposed to the Texans, the team's taking a massive leap backwards. They started off, I think, like 8-1, and I think they're at like 9 or 10 wins right now, right? So the Texans have taken a massive step back. They're not the same type of team they once were. I think there's a chance the Chargers could end up beating the Texans. But against the Ravens, Chargers have no shot against the Ravens, right? In my opinion, they have no shot against the Ravens, especially this Ravens team. Something's clicked over the last like 4 or 5 weeks. This Ravens team is really, really, really solid. And for the Raiders beating the Chargers, it almost just makes it a little bit harder for them to ultimately win. So if I'm the Raiders, I'm going in here, I'm trying to beat this team. But outside of that, I think for the Raiders, we also want to see some of our own players, right? It's the final game of the season, which means it's the final time we'll be able to see DJ Glaze. And of course, Glaze will have a hard matchup coming up, right? He has Khalil Mack, he has Tulu Tolu Peludu. I think that's how you say his name, who's the 2nd-year defensive end of the Chargers. They also have Joey Bosa. So the Chargers have some good edge rushers. So for the Raiders, I want to see DJ Glaze continue to have success. Early on, I'd say like week 8 or 9, I had some reservations about DJ Glaze. I said, I need him to continue to prove it, right? I'm not 100% sure to crown this guy and say, I'm confident this guy can actually be a good tackle in the NFL. Over the last 3 weeks, this guy's taken a massive step forward. And that happens with rookies, right? As the season goes along, you get more comfortable. As you play more seasons, you get even more comfortable. And DJ Glaze has developed so much, in my opinion, over the past couple of weeks. And this week, final game of the season, this guy could potentially put it together and finish the season strong. And then, of course, we'll have the offseason to get better and then come back in year 2. But I think there's a real chance DJ Glaze could be a really good right tackle. We'll see if he can end up hitting like that tier 1, tier 2 group. He can still end up hitting that like tier 3 group, which is kind of where I'd put someone like Colton Miller. They're guys that I think are like between top 12 to 20 tackles in the NFL, right? They're very, very, very good. They're long-term tackles. I think DJ Glaze could hit that, right? So we'll see as he kind of continues to develop where he ends up. But DJ Glaze has looked really solid. Of course, we also are going to get Jackson Powers-Johnson most likely at left guard once again. Jordan Meredith is questionable, so we'll see if they actually end up putting him out there. It's the final game of the season. Doesn't really matter if Powers-Johnson plays left guard or center. I think for him, either position he can continue to play. The speed will kind of continue to slow down. Next year, he should be our starting center. So we'll see if he actually ends up playing center or left guard. Trey Taylor, I want to see this guy out there. I want to see Isaiah Pola-Mao out there. I want to see Trayvon Merrick out there. I want to see these guys go out there and show what they can do to see if they're worth keeping around for next season. Isaiah Pola-Mao is a restricted free agent, which means the Raiders will have every opportunity to kind of bring him back if they choose to. But with that also being stated, Isaiah Pola-Mao is not a Tom Telesco guy. And when you get into the backup safeties, when you start getting into the depth players, usually new general managers change those guys out, right? So Isaiah Pola-Mao is not guaranteed to essentially be here next year. Now, I know he's been solid and he's shown some flashes, but we'll see if the Raiders kind of keep him around. He's been making a lot of plays over the past 2 weeks. There's some young linebackers and defensive linemen. Clavon Chasen's looked really, really good, so we'll see if the Raiders choose to keep him. I want to see how these guys just kind of end this season, and hopefully it's on a strong note. We'll talk about the offense and the quarterback here in a second, but let's talk about Luke Getsy. So Luke Getsy has gotten another job, and he's basically back with the Green Bay Packers, according to Matt LaFleur, or according to the reports. Matt LaFleur was talking recently in an interview, and he basically said that former Raiders offense coordinator Luke Getsy, who was an assistant coach in Green Bay for several years, has been working for the team in recent weeks. LaFleur explained that Getsy is working with their defensive unit in a similar role to Robert Saleh, who was helping oversee their offense after being fired by the Jags. So LaFleur basically said this is the first week he's been here physically. He's been working with us similar to Saleh and the offense. He's been working with the defense. So essentially what Luke Getsy is doing with the Packers is he's getting out there and he's trying to help the defense understand what opposing offenses are trying to do, right? He's trying to help the defensive coordinator scheme up for whatever coaches, coming up. Obviously, Luke Getsy, being a play caller, understands the game a lot better than like the average person does. Although he's not a good play caller or not a good installer of an offense, he still understands concepts and schemes and what teams are trying to do a lot better than any of us, right? Regardless of him being a good coach or not, he's still a smart football mind. So Luke Getsy is working with the Green Bay Packers. He's, will potentially be with them as they kind of hit this playoff run. That'll be interesting to see how that kind of works out for them. They obviously also brought in Robert Saleh, who's helping Matt LaFleur in the offensive side. So it's kind of interesting, right? It's just a small little update with Luke Getsy, which also kind of makes me think, with the season kind of coming to an end, at the beginning of the year, I remember talking about this multiple times, saying that for the Raiders to have success this year, it's going to come down to Luke Getsy. If Luke Getsy ends up being a good coach, the Raiders will have success, but it'll be 100% if Luke Getsy's a good coach or not. I remember we talked about this multiple times, and it's crazy to look back at this season now that the season's over and look at the differences between Luke Getsy and Scott Turner. I was looking at some of the advanced stats on True Media between the two guys. Luke Getsy ranked, I think, 25th in yards when he was with the Raiders, and Scott Turner's ranked 13th in yards. And point-wise is basically the same, right? I think it was 24 and 25 for the two guys. So we're not scoring necessarily more points, but we're putting up a lot more yards. And that's important in terms of, and the context behind that is it's important to realize, because the Raiders are having more success on offense under Scott Turner. Scott Turner is a competent offensive coordinator. Luke Getsy is not, right? And it's just interesting that our offense is working better. It's not leading to points. I think that's mainly because of the fact that our quarterback situation is really bad right now. But hopefully the Raiders can kind of get it fixed as we go into next season with the quarterback position, which takes us into our next update, because our head coach, Antonio Pierce, was asked multiple times about Aidan O'Connell and what he would be going into next season, right? Like, what are your thoughts on Aidan O'Connell? And Antonio Pierce kind of put it out there saying that I think Aidan O'Connell will be a starting NFL quarterback essentially next year, right? This came out, I think, like 2-3 days ago, but it's interesting nonetheless, because it's not guaranteed that Antonio Pierce is going to be here. It's not guaranteed that Aidan O'Connell will be the starting quarterback. It's not guaranteed that we're going to draft a quarterback. But it's also guaranteed that that won't happen, right? It's not guaranteed that AP and AOC won't be our two guys next year, right? We don't really know, right? It could easily be Antonio Pierce, the head coach, and Aidan O'Connell, the starting quarterback for the Raiders next year, right? We don't really know. And I'll be the first to say, guys, watching Aidan O'Connell this season, he's definitely looked better, right? As a quarterback would, being a rookie quarterback going into being a second-year quarterback, you're going to look better, right? You're going to 100% look better. But I still have some issues with Aidan O'Connell as a quarterback. Now, can you have success with Aidan O'Connell? I think it's possible. I think what you would have to do, and I think it's kind of hard to get to this point, I think it's very, very few teams that Aidan O'Connell could actually go to today and have success, but you'd essentially need a really good offensive line. You'd need a great offensive coordinator, and you'd need playmakers to make plays. And then with Aidan O'Connell as kind of the guy in the middle of that to kind of make it happen, he could obviously have success, similar to the way Jared Goff's having success. Great offensive coordinator, great offensive line, great weapons on the offense side of the football, and they're just kind of doing their thing, right? Ben Johnson's kind of calling it up, scheming it up, and Jared Goff's having success. But I think that, with Aidan O'Connell, unless you had that, it's hard to win. And, I go back to those stats that I referenced with True Media. We're putting up a lot of yards, and you guys can just watch the tape. I know I watched the tape. If you guys just, even just watch the games, we're driving downfield more efficiently. Our drives are lasting longer. We're picking up more first downs. We're having more success continuously getting down the field. The thing is once we get to like the plus 30, we're not converting, right? Because the field kind of shrinks, the passing lanes shrink. You can't run the influence routes for guys running 50, 60 yards downfield to open it up, because obviously there aren't 50, 60 yards on the field when you're on the plus 30. The field shrinks, and that's when you need your quarterbacks to create plays, right? So although the Raiders are having success getting, into like that plus 30, plus 40 territory, they're not able to convert that into touchdowns, and that's our big issue right now, in my opinion. And with that, I don't think Aidan O'Connell's ever able to really fix that part of his game, because at some point, once you get down to, the 10, 15, 20-yard line, the passing lanes aren't going to be open. Guys aren't initially going to be open. And the quarterback needs to run right, run left, run through the middle, improvise, which we see guys like Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen. We see these guys do it every single week. Or they get down in the red zone and they're not kicking field goals because those quarterbacks are converting and they're getting it done, right? And I think for the Raiders, until you get that franchise quarterback, we're not going to have success, right? And of course, you got to pair that franchise quarterback up with an offensive coordinator, which takes me to another thing that I kind of want to touch on. Jaxson Dart, man, has looked really, really, really good over the past couple of weeks. And Jaxson Dart yesterday against Duke absolutely dominated. You guys can see PFF College put it out there that Jaxson Dart during his career at Ole Miss had over 10,000 yards, almost 1,500 rushing yards, and 85 total touchdowns, which is pretty damn impressive. I think Jaxson Dart was at Ole Miss for the 22, 23, and 24 season. So I believe it was 3 total seasons, because I believe he was at USC prior to that. And Jaxson Dart has been solid this year, right? And I think it was Jordan Schultz that put it out there that he spoke to an NFL scout, and that scout said that Jaxson Dart is the sleeper of this class. Jaxson Dart could potentially go in the first round. And he said that a scout told him that Jaxson Dart's essentially the sleeper of this class, and that Dart could end up being a really, really good NFL quarterback. Now, I watched Jaxson Dart's tape against Duke. You do got to recognize, right, playing Duke, playing Georgia, playing Michigan, those are three completely different teams, right? Duke is not a good football team. No matter how you look at it, they're not a good football team. Duke probably has no NFL caliber players on their defense side of the football. But Jaxson Dart still made some passes where you said that's freaking impressive, right? Watching his tape against Duke, this guy was slinging it up. I'll put the link of that video if you guys want to check it out down in the comments below. This guy made a couple of really nice passes. On one play, he ran left after he got pressured. He flung it cross body 50 yards downfield and hit his wide receiver. Like, just impressive passes, right? He did that against Duke yesterday multiple times. Guys in the middle of the field, in between three guys, just slinging it. And he looked really, really, really good at Ole Miss. And, I've been learning a lot more about quarterbacks, from a scout's perspective over the past, I'd say 6 weeks. I've been studying some of what quarterbacks have to do in order to be successful. And I've been learning from guys that are a lot smarter than me, right? These are guys that are legit at what they do. And one of the things I've realized with the quarterback play is, you can, and I've always kind of felt this way, right? Like, Kyle Shanahan can take Jimmy G, he could take Brock Purdy, he can take Jaxson Dart, and he will have success with these quarterbacks because he's a great offensive coordinator. And then you can get quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, right? I think all of these guys kind of fall in this other category, which is even if the offensive coordinator is bad, these guys can still kind of have success, right? Because they're really, really, really good quarterbacks. Maybe not Jalen Hurts, but Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert as well, Josh Allen. These guys will elevate anyway. It does not matter because they're great quarterbacks. But what that means is this, right? Those guys are rare, right? There's not a lot of those type of guys. Truth be told, it's probably 10 of those guys in the NFL. The rest of these guys are all I don't want to use the word game manager, but they're all kind of system quarterbacks. And I'm confident when you think about a guy like Jaxson Dart and you say, let's put this guy in this Kyle Shanahan scheme or this Ben Johnson scheme, these guys would have success, right? It's kind of why, when I forget who the backing quarterback is for the Packers, but Malik Willis. When Malik Willis comes in for Jordan Love, he comes in and he just dominates, right? It's partly because of the head coach there, Matt LaFleur, right? And the more I realize that you can get quarterbacks like Jaxson Dart and have success with them. It's one of the reasons why now we're seeing guys like Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold and Geno Smith, after people have written them off, come back and actually have success, right? So I'm not saying you can't have success with Aidan O'Connell or Jaxson Dart or Jalen Milroe, right? Because you can have success with any of these guys. You just got to get that offensive coordinator. Of course, I think, you look at Jalen Milroe as an example. The guy struggles to play within structure. I think that'd be kind of an issue for most offensive coordinators. If you're trying to get Jalen Milroe to hit and read coverage and hit something in year one, he's not going to be able to do that, right? You got to take the Lamar Jackson, the Josh Allen approach with Jalen Milroe, right? People forget Josh Allen had 20 interceptions his first year in the NFL. He had 30 interceptions his final 2 years in college, right? He wasn't that good of a quarterback coming out, but he had traits and he showed some flashes and he's developed. He's probably the second best quarterback right now in the NFL, right? So I say all of that to say this, there's quarterbacks in this class that the Raiders could realistically get. Carson Beck, Jaxson Dart, Jalen Milroe. The list goes on and on. Shedeur Sanders is realistically an option potentially in the second round, right? I think there's a chance he doesn't go in the first round. I would be surprised if any quarterback goes in the first round outside of Campbell, truth be told. I wouldn't be surprised if we got two, but when the second round actually comes back, I think QB3, QB4 are still going to be on the board. And I think for the Raiders, you can still consider one of these other guys and take the chance that one of them develops, right? And you just got to hire a good offensive coordinator. I think if Norv Turner and Scott Turner handpicked a quarterback out of this class, I think those two guys know what they're doing and they'd be able to find a guy that they think they can have success with. So I would even potentially go down that route to let those guys pick a quarterback and kind of mold into what they think is ultimately a winner. So I want to know what you guys think, man. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Now, of course, before we end the video, I want to just give a big shout out to the sponsor of this channel, Underdog Fantasy, and I want to give you guys the picks for this week. I don't think I did a pick for the last 2 weeks. But we got one today. It's a $10 entry. The payout's $574. This one's interesting because there's some records that are kind of on the line, right? So Lamar Jackson, we're going to put it out there that I think he'll throw for at least 3 touchdowns. Now, for Lamar, he wants to be MVP, right? So he's coming into this game saying, I want to throw 5 or 6 touchdowns, or I want to have a big game. And if he does have a big game, which I think he will, to me that means that he has at least 3 or 4 touchdowns. So we're gonna put the higher on Lamar for at least 3 touchdowns. Kyler Murray needs 56 yards to get I think $800,000 or $900,000 bonus. So I think there's a chance Kyler Murray's going to try to get that bonus. I mean, it's almost $1 million, right? There's no way this guy's going to leave that out there. I think it's like 56 yards or something like that. So we're into the higher that he's going to get 50 yards. Truth be told, that might not actually hit. It probably, I would probably never do 50 yards higher on any player, especially quarterback, unless there was a record to be broken or a payout. In this case, the final game of the season, he gets a payout. So we'll take the risk on that. Brock Bowers is going for offensive rookie of the year, and I think he's going to get it. I think he's the favorite. Some people did say they think it's going to be Jaden Daniels. I disagree with that. Daniels has not been that good this year. To be honest, I think if you looked at his stats and compared it to Caleb Williams, it's basically the same. It's really not that big of a difference between those two guys. Or maybe it's Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels. It's fairly close between those two guys. Brock Bowers has broken records, right? Don't forget that. This guy's broken records this year. So I'm going to take that he's going to score at least 1 touchdown, rushing or receiving. And with Aidan O'Connell, I think it's his final game as a starter, or at least in his mind, this could be the final game that he starts. I think there's a chance he comes back as their starter next year, but I think he's going to have a big game against the Chargers. And also, there's a small chance that the Chargers are going to just rest their starters. If the Steelers win on Saturday night, there's no need for the Chargers to play their starters. It does not benefit them at all if they win or lose. So I could see them ending up taking out their defensive guys, which would open things up for Aidan O'Connell. He's had over 225 yards in each of the last 2 weeks, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him also have kind of a big game. Final game of the season, final pick of the season, $10, $574 is the payout. Support Underdog. They obviously supported this channel over the course of this season. Thumbs up, subscribe. Let me know what you guys think, man, and I will see you guys next time with another video.